The holidays start here at Baker's with a variety of options to celebrate traditions old and new. You could do a classic herb-roasted turkey or spice it up and make turkey tacos. Serve up a go-to shrimp cocktail or use Simple Truth wild-caught shrimp for your first Cajun risotto. Make creamy mac and cheese or a spinach artichoke fondue from our selection of Murray's cheese. No matter how you shop, Baker's has all the freshest ingredients to embrace all your holiday traditions. Baker's, fresh for everyone.
Which is happens for a lot of this stuff. At the time, the seal was only really for people who had money. If you didn't have money, you more than likely couldn't read, and heck, even the people who had money also probably couldn't read, so it wasn't. My name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week, I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? Hello, and welcome to another episode of How Did That Happen? This week we are discussing the word signatures and just signatures overall, autographs, any of those. Come along for the ride this week as I ask signatures. How did that happen? Let's see, before we get started here, a couple housekeeping bits. I hope everybody's going to listen to Bite-Sized Bios every Thursday at 4:30 a.m. We are finally getting into the meat of the mini-episode portion where we actually cover things that were missed in the previous episodes. I know they weren't quite that way when they were first getting established, but now if you go back to this last episode, I give you a little bit more information on toothpaste and teeth and stuff that I thought that I needed to cover. I couldn't quite find a way to put in to the actual HDTH every Monday episode, but so that's going on. I hope you guys are loving that. Let's see, what am I watching? I just finally, it took me probably 3, maybe 4 viewings because it was just, I don't know, I wasn't in the right headspace a lot of times, but I just finished All Quiet on the Western Front. And might I say, it was magnificent. It was awesome. I really enjoy war films. I know that always feels weird to say because, I mean, even just watching this, I mean, it's so atrocious. It is, but that is what makes it so good. Unfortunately, it's like, to me, it's the most, and I obviously wasn't there, but it seems to be the most accurate and truthful telling of World War I that we've seen almost up until this point. 1917 definitely did it pretty well. There are definitely some others, but I just finished watching that. May have to go back and read the book. Of course, I read it in high school, but it was mind blowing. It's just too long for me to sit and watch in one sitting. Like I said, it took me like 3 or 4 instances. I watched it like it was a mini series, really more than actual whole movie. But yeah, watch that if you get a chance. I also watched Lou. I was not impressed. It could have been good, but the script, it was just doing too much. It was one of those movies that I was so unimpressed with it that halfway through I had to look up the reviews to just be like, am I hating on this movie? Like, is something wrong with me? But a lot of people were saying a lot of the same things. They were just trying too hard. Too many movie tropes being thrown all into one. But maybe there's room for another version of that movie. I don't know. I'm not trying not to be negative, but that's pretty much it for what I was watching. I'm still plugging away at hdthappen.com every week. You guys can go over there and find the accompanying blog posts that go with each episode that we put out. Every blog post will either be a transcript or a summary of the episode, as well as some pictures and or links that were mentioned that maybe you wanted to see. Definitely with this one, there's going to be some pictures of certain signatures, Obama's signature, as well as some King's signatures that I may or may not put on the Twitter page and might just put on the actual website. But if you have any suggestions for what you would like to see on the website, or if there are issues that you have and shortcomings that you may think that I don't see yet, let me know. Like I said, and same thing with the actual podcast itself. If you want to leave a review, I would love that. Subscribe, 5 stars, all that good stuff. Do it where you feel comfortable. And if you don't, that's fine too. You want to keep listening, it's all good. Other than that, I don't think there's much to say before we get on with the episode. Nope. Here are signatures. So today we are talking about signatures, autographs, John Hancocks, whatever you want to call them. We will get into all of that, and I will even tell you where we get John Hancock's from. The idea of that being called a signature. But we got to start where we normally start with this podcast, which is in the beginning. So I'm going to break down to you really fast what a signature even is. The traditional function of a signature is to permanently affix to a document a person's uniquely personal and undeniable self-identification as physical evidence of that person's personal witness and or certification of the content of all that specified, part of the document. Basically, so that's just saying this is your signature is saying this is you saying this is me and this is me on this document. Is a really short way of saying that. Let's see. We have some of the first signatures were made by the Sumerians. They invented the earliest signature, which wasn't a signature at all. It was actually a seal. We'll see there'll be a time before we get to where people start using the actual like Latin alphabets and sign the way that we know as signatures today. But the first signature, like I said, was made by the Sumerians, and it was actually a seal. They were typically attached to a small round cylinder, which is about 1 inch in length and would be pressed into wet clay. And what we'll see is this really does become the basis for a lot of signature type objects in Eastern culture, because we're talking about other things from Japan and China that are almost this exact same thing. And so just quickly about the Sumerians, if you didn't know, if you're like, ooh, these Sumerians, they did that, but who are they? The Sumerians are one of the earliest known civilizations. They existed about 5,000 years ago in Sumer, which is in the historical region of southern Mesopotamia, which is present-day Iraq. So just so you have a little bit of idea. Because when I read this stuff sometimes, and I'm like, oh, cool, the Sumerians. I don't know the Sumerians. I don't feel like we learned that much about them in school. Maybe we did. Maybe I just wasn't listening. But yeah, so that's a little bit about them. Recently, what was considered the oldest signature in history was sold at auction, and was said to have come from this place in time. And we have a little bit of information about that. The signature has been interpreted by experts as spelling the word Kushim, right? And since very few during that time were actually literate in ancient Sumeria, it was believed that this individual was likely a government scribe of some sort, and was kind of the guy who was kind of charged with the keeper of records, if you will. And it has generally been accepted that Kushim is probably a personal name. I mean, this was like 7,000 years ago or 6,000 years ago, so who really knows? But others have speculated that Kushim is an official title. I'll definitely be posting pictures of this either on the Twitter page or on the website, probably on the website for sure. And it does mean it shows it's got some holes in it, kind of thing that they say the holes correspond to some sort of pattern that makes the words. It doesn't look like anything you would ever actually think of as a signature or an autograph, but it is believed to be the earliest example of an autograph. Let's see. They found another. There's like two that are really really important as far as being the first kind of signatures and stuff like that are all from the same place. The other one that they found was actually a recipe for beer, a sort of barley based beer that I'm not sure. I guess the reason for its importance is because it has this guy's Kushim, stamp on it as well. And but yeah, so there are several markings on that object that show how beer was produced at a temple in Mesopotamia around 3100 BC, and some images appear to show grains and jars in the process of brewing. I mean, that's pretty much it about that. But then you get the signatures in Jewish communities, which they have been around for years, at least since the 2nd century, and among Muslims since the Hijra, which is the migration of Muhammad and his followers to Medina around the year 622. And so one other popular way to create an impression, to have a seal type thing, was to wear what is called a signet ring. And what they would do is they would press these into all different types of things. Like I said, they used, I think, what do they say, wax and dirt, different things. I think they used beeswax specifically, or clay, excuse me, not dirt, but so the signet rings themselves were also used as validation. So a king might, for example, dispatch a herald bearing an oral message to a foreign power and then give him the royal signet ring so that when he got there, basically they would know that he meant business. I'm saying all this, and here's the signet ring of the king to back up whatever I'm saying. Wonder if that's also where they get the idea of kiss the ring from. Might have to look that up sometime. Taking a Google break. Taking a break to Google. Trying to get the facts straight. Taking a Google break. Okay, I just looked it up, and it turns out that is exactly where that comes from. Odd. Or not odd, but interesting that I just thought about that when I said that, because it just popped in my head like, oh, kiss the ring. And it's like, because the ring really meant something at that time. Yeah. So when we'll move on from that to these Japanese stamps / they're called Henkos or Incans, whatever you want to call. I guess that you can use those interchangeably pretty much. But these are what I was kind of talking about when you talk about how the early signatures themselves from the Sumerians were actually more of a seal thing. It also explains kind of how we get the signet rings from early European rulers as well. Is that this is basically this is the early way that humans signed their names, basically, is with these little stamps. And so the Henko is a carved stamp that can be used in any situation where an individual on behalf of a company might otherwise use a signature or initials, right? And so signing contracts, doing your banking, or receiving a parcel are just three different ways that people in Japanese culture and East Asian culture in certain places as well use these hankos. And so hankos came over to Japan from China via the Silk Road about 2,000 years ago. And that's why I say that they're used all throughout Eastern Asia, but it seems as if Japan, once they got them, really kind of held on to them, whereas other cultures kind of let them go by the wayside. They don't mean as much as they used to. And even now in Japan, they don't mean as much as they used to now, but they still are pretty prevalent, and it is still a normal way to sign your name in that country. And so, like I said earlier, they originated in Mesopotamia. They're a little different then. The first evidence of writing in Japan was of a hanko that dates back to 57 CE, and it was made of solid gold, and it was given to the ruler of Nakoku. Nakoku? It's a cool name. I'm not getting it right. Which is a state located in and around modern day Fukuoka City, as it should, right? But this is basically the one that I was talking about, where they came over from the Chinese, and they gave this guy a seal, and it was like really awesome. And then so at that time, which happens for a lot of this stuff, at the time the seal was only really for people who had money. If you didn't have money, you more than likely couldn't read, and heck, even the people who had money also probably couldn't read. So it wasn't something that people were. It wasn't as ubiquitous as it is now, just the same way that literacy is. So it really, when it started, especially even in Japan, it was only for the wealthy. Let's see, the idea of stamps, like I was saying, dates back to more than 5500 BC in the Middle East, where it was used as personal symbols that were engraved on stones, clay, wood, shells of any kind. Let's see, there are three types of hankos, which I thought was interesting. That's why I want to put it in here, because when you talk about it, you think it's just going to be one. But there's not. There are three, and they're all for specific different things. And so I'll give them to you right now. The first one is called the Jitsu-in, which would be used in the signing of a contract, like setting up a company or buying a house. And this seal has to be registered with your local government. Then there's the Ginkgo-in, and these are only for financial transactions. And these hankos must be registered with financial institutions like banks. So depending on the different type of hanko you have, they must be on file with a certain institution. So the last one is called a mitome-in, and this is for everyday things like receiving packages and stuff like that. And this one doesn't have to be registered anywhere. So it's just like, if you're at your house in Japan and a package comes up, and like, can you sign this? You just pop your little stamp on there, bow, and you're done. Hankos are still used today to denote authorship and ownership. They've all, but like different things have kind of come up to kind of make them not as used, I guess you could say. The DocuSign has also teamed up with company over there to develop an e-hanko. So just like we have e-signatures, which I'll get to as well, they have e-hankos over there. And so I thought I would get to, we've kind of ran through the early parts of the Middle Eastern signatures as well as Asian signatures. But what I will talk about now are other different ways, before we get to the European part, of how agreements have been sealed, kind of, which is what a signature does. It seals an agreement. So before signatures were everywhere, and before people could write, and before literacy was really a thing, there were other ways that people chose to seal an agreement. There were ones, let's see, that where you could cut off a lock of hair and give it to someone to seal an agreement or a contract. And then there were in the 13th century, there were agreements where you could you could seal the deal with slapping somebody in the face or some other traumatic act. I love that they put some other traumatic act, because that just leaves it open to any sort of traumatic act you could think of, but it starts with a slap. And so the idea behind that was that both parties would remember not only the injury, but the accord that was reached on its infliction. So basically, you'd slap a dude so hard and say, like, I'm gonna pay you $50 next month, and I slap you across the face, and it's like, this guy's, I remember that because my face hurts, and also that means he's gonna pay me $50 next week. I guess that's how that works. So that brings us to signatures in Europe. So during the Middle Ages, people would do different things to contracts and letters to show that they had, kind of put their stamp on it, if you will. They were usually write things like simple crosses, different pictographs, which we'll get into. Guys almost kind of created, they would draw their own sort of, I guess, hanko level type stamp thing, because, like I said, not everybody could write back then. In the medieval period, during the time of Charles the Great and the 500 years or so that came after that, most people, and even most of the kings, like I was saying earlier, they were illiterate, and so the signature was more or less a picture, like I was saying, something they would kind of draw out, if you will. And what they would have is, I'll post some of these on the website, is that they would have the scribes who could write, right? The scribes would write their names, like write the first name, and then there'd be leave a space, and they write their surname, and in the middle of that space, that's where the king would go and like draw his little doodle, right? That says, this is me, because he couldn't write. He was smart enough to run a country, but not smart enough to learn the alphabet. It's a whole different thing, I guess. But the signature was essentially, like I was saying, an artistic arrangement of letters that usually happened to include the letters that made up the name, so that they would kind of get pretty creative with it. And it wasn't really until the second half of the 11th century that we really see people start to use the Latin alphabets to make, or the Latin alphabet to make a signature, really. And the first actual depiction that we have of that was from the Spanish military leader El Cid, who was a knight, and we covered him, I believe, in episode 17. He made a donation to the Cathedral of Valencia, and when he did so, he signed his name. But if you ever get a chance, definitely go back and check out, I believe it was episode 17 about knights. El Cid they even made a movie about him. He was one of the most just hardcore knights out there. Like, dude did not mess around. There are still statues about him in Spain. Like, I think there may even be a day named after him. Like, he's a pretty big figure. During the medieval times, as we're kind of still during European history, like I said, the scribes would sign things with like the cross, right? Which is kind of where people think the idea of writing your X as a name, or if you can't read and you can't write, you can just mark an X, and that means that's your signature. They think that comes from the idea of about 1,000 years ago. The scribes who were handling most of these documents, who would validate the documents, they would do it by putting the sign of the cross, which if you just kind of tilt the cross over, it's a lopsided X, basically. But it wasn't until the later parts of the medieval period, where really the beginning of the Renaissance, where we start to see signatures become a part of, I guess, showing, how can I put this, that like really using it to say like, I'm the one that did this, look how great this is, as opposed to right before that, what you would really see is signatures that were used by masons and stuff like that on stonework to show that they were able to basically show that I did that. You should pay me. Whereas when you get to the Renaissance, artist signatures started to be more common. One of the first ones of that nature, one of the first signatures that kind of signified that would be Michelangelo's painting in the St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City, which we also cover. We cover that, not Michelangelo, but St. Peter's Basilica. We cover in the history of the Pope, I believe. I think that's episode 30. But yeah, during this time when that started to happen, the idea of having a literate signature was not really all the rage, and that's kind of, I think, where we get it now, where you see these people with these just huge, just immaculate signatures just sweeping through everything. It's like the idea that idea comes from this early Renaissance time to say that an intricate and an illegible signature rather than a printed one suggested that you had an education in handwriting. So it's, I think, people still think that it's, as you see people with these crazy signatures, it's like, no one's asking for that. People don't even know how to write cursive anymore. You don't have to do that. And so the next big piece of legislation, the next big piece of legislation to happen in Europe that kind of affects signatures is the Statute of Frauds, which happens in 1677, and this stipulates that contracts must exist and in writing and bear a signature. So up before then, we're talking about buying houses or other types of property or marriages and things like that. There was a lot of handshakes or slap people in the face, as I said earlier, different things. You cutting people's hair off, whatever you want to do. But once they got to 1677, they were basically like, hey, now all this stuff has to be in writing. And so, like I said, it's a legal concept that requires certain types of contracts to be executed in writing. And the statute covers contracts for the sale of land, agreements involving goods over $500, and any contract that lasts a year or more. Basically, all that has to be documented in writing. This starts in 1677. So that kind of persists for a while. And then the next piece of actual legislation, I think, that makes a difference in America is the 1869 case between Howley and Whipple. Let me check and see if that's a Supreme Court case or not. I think it is, but I don't want to lie. Taking a Google break. Taking a break to Google. Trying to get the facts straight. Taking a Google break. I am glad I checked because it is not a U.S. Supreme Court case, but it is a New Hampshire Supreme Court case. And so basically this case, it established that an agreement made by telegram constituted a signed contract. And long before the use of computers and capture signatures, businesses were using dotted communications of Morse code and telegrams to sign contracts. And so basically this was allowing them to implement laws to protect those documents that they were already using. And these were actually considered the first electronic signatures. And I mean, it may seem simple because we live in a world now for the last 150 years where that's the case. But when you think about it, I mean, these guys were basically they were trying to figure out what makes a legal document, and so this was the case that basically declared that it made no difference whether the document was written with a steel pen or whether it was had been a message that was received by a copper wire 1,000 miles away. Basically, we're all agreeing that this now constitutes a sealed agreement. And so that's pretty much signatures. I've got just a little bit more to cover before we get to the next segments, but I mean, you want to know how signatures happen. I mean, we go from getting the seals, in Sumeria about 5,000-6,000 years ago. That gets transferred over to Asia as well, and it seems to go to Europe via the signet ring, and then it kind of goes. We get the Hankos that go from there, and then as people learn, the Latin alphabet in Europe, they start to write their signatures, and it becomes a thing. Probably from the artists, really not just the artists, but as far as signatures becoming what they are, I believe it does come from probably, I think, looking at the artists during the Renaissance time. But then we'll get to e-signatures really fast before we move on. There's not much to say about it. But what the legislation that really makes e-signatures a thing really is the Electronic Signatures in Global and National Commerce Act. It's called e-sign. This happened in 2000, was signed by Bill Clinton. And this kind of is what provides the general rule of validity for electronic records and signatures for transactions in or affecting interstate or foreign commerce. So it's like really us laying down the law the same way they had to do 200 years ago when they were like, what makes a signature? Now that we have computers, now, is it legal to sign a signature on a computer? Is that the same thing as signing on paper? So this was kind of the first real legislation that addressed that. Let's see. Before we get out of here, I want to mention autographs really fast. Not a whole lot to say, but what I saw that interests me was that I didn't even think about the fact that there were just so many expensive autographs that have been bought and sold over the years. So I'm going to run through a couple of those with you. I don't think I'm going to go in any real particular order, but I will tell you the largest one whenever we get to it. But one that really interests me was that there's a John F. Kennedy newspaper that he signed on the day that he was assassinated, and so there's the JFK signature on that with the date and everything. It's sold for like $39,000, but just the idea, I didn't know that even actually existed. But him signing a newspaper in Texas, the day he died. Let's see. There is a Jimi Hendrix contract that was sold for $200,000 with, of course, his signature on it. Let's see. This one is pretty wild. I'm a big John Lennon fan, big Beatles fan, and recently last year was able to actually go to the Dakota building where he was murdered and see the little memorial in Central Park and everything. It was really cool. But so in that vein, his murderer, Mark David Chapman, got his album signed a couple hours before he came back and murdered him. That album is still in existence, and it was sold for over $500,000. That's the kind of thing that if I ever had money like that, I would definitely feel like I have to get that. Let's see. There's a Lincoln signature on the Emancipation Proclamation. I think they said he signed almost 50 of those things, and like half of them are still around. Most of them are at museums, different colleges, but one of them was sold to Ted Kennedy. I believe they said for $3.7 million. And the last one that I'll mention, which is the largest one, it is George Washington's autograph on his personal copy of the U.S. Constitution. And so basically it's its own copy, but he signed it in the front, and so it's like a really big thing, and it sold for like $9.8 million. And that's just a quick, interesting. Autographs are always cool. They kind of gone out of style, as of late. When I was a kid, it was a big deal. I used to have an autograph book, but never think about how much money these people's signatures actually go for, and where their signatures, the whole idea of them having to sign came from. And that is how signatures happened. And now it's time for the roundup. And we're going to round it up. The Sumerians invented the earliest signature, which wasn't a signature at all. It was a seal. Hankos came over to Japan from China via the Silk Road about 2,000 years ago. They originated in Mesopotamia. It is not until the second half of the 11th century that we have knowledge of a document signed in the Latin alphabet. In 1677, the Statute of Frauds stipulated that contracts must exist in writing and bear a signature. Things I didn't know before. And now I know them. Never heard of these things. What are they? All right. I've actually got a few for you this time on the things I didn't know before. Sometimes there's just not that many interesting things. Sometimes I forget to put things in, and sometimes you have to use it for other parts of the topic or the segments, and it's just, I don't know, not always that interesting. But I told you I would tell you how we got John Hancock as a name for his signature. So basically, John Hancock, he was an early American politician and a signer of the U.S. Declaration of Independence, right? And not only was he a signer, he was the first signature on the document. Not only was he the first, he was the largest. So basically, from that, and it being one of the most important documents in American history, the idea of a signature being, he basically created the idea of a signature being called John Hancock because his was so illustrious and so large and just in your face, basically. That's how we get it. So when someone says, put your old John Hancock on there, which I don't even know if people are saying anymore. They definitely said it when I was a kid. But yeah, that's where you get that from. So he was the first one to put it on there, and he just put it on there big, loud, and proud. One other, so I have two more, and this next one, I just thought, and I'll definitely post a picture of this on the website. It is someone analyzed Barack Obama's signature and they tell you all the different things that explain, I guess, either who he is or what he's trying to elicit from said signature. And so I'll run it through really fast just because there's a lot and I'm not going to do all that. But they basically show that his signature shows that he has a desire for responsibility. He has a desire to be needed by a large number of people. This shows that he possesses a fluidity of thoughts in his personality. They're getting all this from the loops and swoops on his signature. That's like a signature analysis. And let's say he is cautious in his decision-making approach, always chooses to be careful in order to minimize risks. Other things like that. There's the whole rundown that I may or may not post the link, but I'll definitely post the picture because they do like the whole, it's a picture of his signature, and they're just like pointing at different parts, like, this is why he has fluidity of thoughts. This is why he has a desire for responsibility. And I'm like, I don't know if that stuff is grounded in fact or not, but I thought it was pretty wild when I read it. And the last one that I'll share with you before we get out of here is probably the wildest one for me. When I read this the other night, and I was just like, I don't know, it's because I think I don't know, but so there's a thing called the Polish plait, right? And it is basically white dreadlocks, which there's nothing wrong with that. That's not really the crazy part. White dreadlocks exist. What's crazy is that it was basically like it was all the like it was a big thing. Like 1,000 years ago, it was all the rage in Poland and parts of Europe for people to have these huge, just long, matted, just locked up pieces of hair that will sometimes occur naturally. But they would help it along by mixing different things in their hair, sometimes like wine and sugar, and like it was this whole thing. I would definitely put a picture of that up there. I'm envisioning all of these like early European like white people with like these super huge dreadlocks. It was just a little too much for me the other night when I was looking this up. They go by different names in different parts of Europe. There's in Germany, I think they're called the Weisselsstoff, right, or the Vistula braid, because evidently Vistula is a river in Poland. And initially the plait was considered an amulet, right? So this is like almost religious, not quite religious beliefs, but kind of like it. So they would use it as an idea to keep the illness away from your body. So it was believed that when the disease was resolved, it left the body and went to live in the hair, which resulted in less suffering for you as a person. And so when you look at your hair, that's where all your suffering is. And so for this reason, people would develop it, and people would have them their whole lives. And so I never knew that. This is the part, I guess, I never knew that dreadlock culture really also existed in Europe, like almost completely separate from Rastafarian culture. Because you could say now, when you think of the idea of guys with white dreadlocks or women with white dreadlocks, the idea is that it comes from like the Caribbean descent sort of thing. Like you're doing it because that's the umbrella that you're under. You're not doing it because your ancestors had a Polish plait. You know what I mean? But so to know that exists, it just brings everything more closer together. We think that we're all so different, but it's like when you look at history, it's like there was a time when that was just everyone was doing that over there the same way they're doing it over here now. I don't know, but that's when I read that I was just like, that's definitely a thing that I didn't know before. All right, learned a lot about signatures. Learned where John Hancock came from, or John Hancock. There's only one person. Hope it was a good episode for you guys. Hope you go to hdthappen.com as well as at HDT Happen on the Twitter page and just let me know what you think, as well as just see what gets put up there. Like and subscribe where you can. I'll see you guys in a few days. As always, thanks for listening. Bye.
The holidays start here at Baker's with a variety of options to celebrate traditions old and new. Whether you're making a traditional roasted turkey or spicy turkey tacos, your go-to shrimp cocktail, or your first Cajun risotto, Baker's has all the freshest ingredients to embrace your traditions. Baker's, fresh for everyone.
We've locked in low prices to help you save big store-wide. Look for the locked in low prices tags and enjoy extra savings throughout the store. Baker's, fresh for everyone.
Okay, round two. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.